Do you have any copies of the questions that you sent? By any chance? Or yes. Oh. Yes. Yes. If you do you need the questions? Sure. You need one more? Did that. Would you like to do the story or stories first, or the questions?
Can I just ask you one more clarifying question? Is the name of the figure in the Struggle story Margaret?
Margarita.
Okay.
I think I left out the L when I typed it.
I was just making sure.
Yes. Should we do the stories first? Or at least one, we'll see how our time goes. Do you have a preference which story? Straparola? Okay. If anyone would like some water, there's water over there along with the food. So first of all, thank you all for coming and for doing this at such a busy time of year. I really, really appreciate it. And unless you specify otherwise, we're putting your names in the video. We could put anonymous. Anonymous.
This is so awkward. Like your face, and then below it says anonymous.
Okay, I think we'll start. So thank you for coming, and thank you for doing this. Although we're going to talk about the Straparola story specifically, it is the case that both stories we read for today deal with love, and the narrators characterize love in a certain way. How? When the narrator intrudes, how does he or she talk about love? Yeah.
At the beginning of Straparola, you get this catalog of sort of the awful effects of love and all the terrible things that it can do to you. And therefore, it sort of sets up the story as something where we already know what's going to happen at the end. Of course, things are going to end badly on account of love, so that's the framing.
Yes. Okay, good. Miriam, you're going to say something?
Essentially that it's described as this terrible evil. Most people have this connotation of love as something beautiful, as something that they want, but then immediately we get this description of something. It calls it irrational will, lustful thinking, wasting away of bodily strength, loss of liberty, all of these really negative characteristics that are not normally associated with that term.
Yes. Okay, so I know we're not necessarily dealing with the content of Bandello, but Bandello also opens his story with a letter that characterizes love. And what does he have to say? Or more specifically, how men respond to love or to adultery, to perceived dishonor.
Well, I thought it was interesting that the lady, the Duchess, she feels so passionate about him, yet he doesn't realize it until she actually articulates it to him, and then he falls for it immediately. It seems like he's been feeling the same thing, but he hasn't been able to articulate it to himself.
Mhm.
He needs her to do that.
Yes. Yes, and probably both authors in some way, indeed, are exploring different social strata and shifting social orders. Okay, so back to this story then. And so briefly, what is the story of Margaritas or Latina? Yes, please.
So the story is basically about, it's about a hermit who lives on an island, and he goes to sort of a city to beg, and then he meets Margarita, and Margarita falls in love with him, and then sort of she admits it to him. And I think I was pretty struck by the way that she sort of like took the agency, and it even says like love gave her the direction to do something that she wouldn't have otherwise done. And then so they sort of have this affair, and she swims to the island every time that he sets up a burning light. That's sort of like their signal, and they have their affair, and then she swims back. And then there's fishermen who see her, and then who find out who she is. And they're sort of deliberating whether or not they should tell her brothers. And at first they're like, oh, it's a secret, so we'll just keep it for her. But then they say that it would be dishonorable for their family if sort of that became public knowledge. So then they tell the brothers. And the brothers, when they find out, first they don't believe it, so they have to go see it for themselves. And then, like, all of a sudden, sort of, they just decide that she has to die. There's, like, the one line where it's like, and they decided that she had to die or something, and then they set up this whole sort of plan to kill her. And that's pretty much the younger brother goes to the island to distract the hermit, and then the other brothers, they set up a light so that Margarita goes and follows the light because that's their signal only for, but then the brothers sort of keep moving the light farther and farther away, so as she swims, she gets tired, and then she sort of, she drowns in the sea because she's too tired. And then at the really end, the hermit, the Margarita's body washes up ashore, and then the hermit finds her body, and the hermit sort of, he's really upset, and he's pretty close to killing himself too, but then he doesn't, that's what it says. And then he gives her a proper burial, which I thought was really important because that's something that comes up in different stories too, is just the burial, resting the soul.
Thank you. So what were things that struck you about this story? What were things that interested you? And why did you pick this one when I asked which one we were to start? Carly?
Well, I thought one of the interesting aspects of this story that, came up in a lot of the other tales we read this semester was the kind of the conflict between love and one's like familial duties, because in loving a hermit, this woman is kind of dishonoring her family, and in this tale, the family, her brothers, take it upon themselves to, kill her because she has stepped outside of those social boundaries. But the tale doesn't necessarily like malign her for having the feelings. It seems more to blame love itself for her destruction than her for having stepped outside the bounds of social propriety.
Would you agree with that? Or add to it in some way?
I think that love in the story, it endows her with a sort of superhuman strength and power, willpower, and also physical power, since she manages the task of swimming back and forth between the island that the hermit lives on and her home. However, it also sort of de-emphasizes how impressive she is. It depicts her as sort of mad, and that's why she's able to accomplish all of these feats, and not only just the physical feats, but also her level of rebelliousness, the fact that she's going outside of the bounds of her life or status and pursuing a hermit. That takes courage, but we don't really get any emphasis on her courage or strength because it's inspired by love. So in a way, love sort of invalidates her as an individual.
Okay. Carly, do you follow up on that?
Well, not exactly going off of that, but I was also thinking about the way that this tale, in terms of the way that it conceives morality, it definitely emphasizes that one's morality is not dependent on one's class or social standing, because it's the hermit who, he's kind, he's polite to the brothers, he He's very reasonable in, you know, he treats the Margarita like a person, and, you know, is concerned for her when she's putting herself in danger to see him. And in the end, he's the one who finds her body and gives her a proper burial when, you know, it was her brothers who killed her.
Yes, yes. Lily?
Just to go off of that, I was also thinking about the question of morality, and I definitely agree about what Carly was saying about the hermit being sort of one of the moral centers. But like Abdul was saying about sort of like the way that love is described by the narrator, basically, you like the brothers aren't, you don't like necessarily feel like the brothers are supposed to be read as immoral, but really it's the love that drives Margarita that we're supposed to sort of be condemning, even though it's like when I read it, and I think nowadays like most people would read it like the brothers did something wrong, but maybe like in that time that was sort of not necessarily an immoral thing to do because of the question of honor.
Yes, okay. Grace, did you have a hand up?
Yeah, I can sort of respond to that. I was thinking, going back to the question of love, but also sort of now bringing up the terms honor and morality. These are the things that seem to sort of be at work in the narrator. You know, will say one thing, you know, this is like at the end, he gives us that one-liner, and this way was preserved the honor of the brothers and of the lady, nor did anyone ever find out what became of her. So you sort of get this weird tension between, you know, the outside honor of the brothers that the narrator is on one level holding up and saying, you know, they've done the right thing in this. And yet there's still sort of that discomfort that, you know, love is in fact this wonderful, ennobling, motivating force that can help Margarita do all these different wonderful things. But at the same time, love also doesn't actually in the end help her conquer the physical, and he can't even really ascribe that failure of love to help her through the final journey through the sea to like the brothers or any of the human impulses. He says, you know, oh, it's fortune that has sort of destroyed this. So sort of get this weird positioning between all of these things.
Yes, no, I think that's right. Miriam, you had a hand up, and Carly.
Yeah, I feel like one thing we're all touching on a little bit is that it's difficult for a modern reader to read this, because what struck me so intensely reading it was this kind of deliberate betrayal of the brothers to their sister. They actively decided she needs to be killed, which is something that I can't really imagine, and most of us can't really imagine now, but it goes back to this idea of what was kind of a family duty at the time. And so these different levels of morality, it's hard to resonate with something like this. And I feel like what's jarring to us now might not have been jarring to the reader at the time when it was written.
Yes.
Just adding to that as well, it's also very interesting that the narrators of these stories, the Strapparola writes, are all women. Because in the frame of the story, I think it was Lady Lucrezia who dictated that all the narrators should be women. And so like the fact that they're all women and they're telling stories about the harmful effects of love on women is kind of interesting, and also very like odd to think about at this time.
Yes. Yeah. No,
It kind of reflects the limits of the society back then, and also like Strapparola does say that like he's not telling the story; he's just merely writing down what he heard.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
No, that's good. That's a good point, Carly.
I think the fact that this is a frame story kind of means that there are more levels of, you know, of meaning in the story than perhaps like a single reading could impart on it. So, you know, we've kind of been discussing this as like a serious, like moral tale, but on some level I think it's kind of ironic. It's an ironic tale. There, you know, this conclusion at the end that, and in this way was preserved the honor of the brothers and of the lady, nor did anyone ever find out what became of her. Like it, you know, that's on a surface level tragic, but this is in a story where, you know, in the initial paragraph there's, you know, this description of love as something entirely negative. You know, I think it's being deliberately almost ridiculous in its characterization of love. I think there's an ironic level that, in addition to the moral level.
I agree.
Yes.
I think one thing that tips off to irony is the fishermen, when they decide at first to not do anything, and then immediately, just like there's a period, and then the next sentence they change their mind. That's comedy. That's not. I mean, I can't find any other way of reading that other than being like an indication that this is trying to undermine the honor killing idea.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's also the, you know, the kind of obvious ridiculousness of this woman of a higher standing falling in love with a hermit. Like it's a hermit. You know, I think that there's definitely like an explicit comedic level to the tale.
Meeper.
Just like on that comedic level of the tale, like the irony, I feel like the story also like it just doesn't believe itself. Like what Carly said, it'd be one thing if the story ended saying, well, this is why love is bad because look what obviously happened to her. But it's just saying this is what, you know, this is how honor was preserved. So it does not, it seems to also like not really believe itself. It needs to be a didactic story of like the actual natural consequences of love. So that's interesting.
Yeah, yes, Grace?
Yeah, and I think another instance of, you know, a point at which we can't really take the story seriously is when Margarita does actually, you know, claim her love, declare love to the hermit, and Theodora sort of like listens to her and says, oh, okay, well, she's got some pretty good reasons, so I'm going to love her too now. And it's just one of those moments where like, okay, that's not exactly how love maybe should or can work, right? And that sort of sets you up then again for like the closing frame at the end of the story, when you realize that not only is the story sort of not serious, but it's misinterpreted as being serious by the listeners in a certain way. Because they all say, oh, let's go off and let's pray and do penance for our sins. As if they're almost like feeling, oh, maybe I have loved at some point or I've done wrong in some way, parallel to what's going on with the story.
Yes, good. Miriam?
I also think it's interesting to examine this tale in the context of all the other tales because it is a frame tale story. So we can't just look at it in isolation. And going from the first couple of tales when there are enchanted snakes and pigs and kind of jewels falling from hair and all of these very magical, fantastical elements, I think in a way they kind of impose themselves on the story even if they're not there. So we read this knowing what has come before, what surrounds it. So I think the context that it's in has a strong influence in how believable it is and how seriously we take the tale itself.
Yes, yes. No, I think that's a good point. I always thought the swimming was just a strange thing. And then there was the Julia Roberts movie where she tries to get away from the evil husband and she doesn't know how to swim. And so they're out on the boat and what she has done is the lights on the shore, she has broken one so that she can see where the gap is, and she goes and trains herself to swim and then swims to shore, which I always found hilarious. But so you're still telling the same story centuries later about the light on the beach being your guide. No, I think this is right, that all these is it a story about the justification of honor killing? Is it a story about, is it a warning against a cautionary tale about love? Is it a story, is it a tragedy? Is it tragic? Is his love for her at the end where he's kissing the washed up body and putting violets on her, is this supposed to be beautiful and uplifting, that she's buried in a little chapel? Is this a religious story? Is this going to be a shrine in the future where lovers will go? So I think you're right in seeing all these different levels. I think there was another hand up. Billy, you had a hand up.
I also wanted to say that just adding on to the comedic element of the story, perhaps it might also be the case that Straparola doesn't want the story to become didactic in any way, or like we may not be like we may not need to take some kind of moral lesson from the stories, since again in the frame of the story, like the main reason why these stories are being narrated in the first place is to entertain a group of higher class men and women who want to spend the carnival period just dancing and telling great stories to like just have fun. And I think he said that Straparola writes in the beginning of the frame that I think he said that these stories are meant to
I'm sorry, my pollen's in my throat. I'm so sorry.
Which may be one of the main reasons why like these stories just don't wrap up perfectly to this like nice bow and finish up what they've started.
Yes, no, I think that's right. Yes, and then Abdul?
Yeah, with like these layers of things that don't like get it, we don't know how to exactly take the story in all these ways. Because I mean, there are moments that are cautionary and didactic, saying, you know, love does blind you, and it does, you know, you get all the dark light imagery, seeing, not seeing things. And then like it makes you think also about serious issues like honor, morality, how do these things smash up in the social sphere, and then like in the literary sphere, and also then again like the entertainment quality you were talking about. And it sort of almost points at the first thing that we're given, love, as I don't know, like a formal way that's sort of mimicking what happens in love, and how love is itself the same thing. You can't really define or understand in just one way. You have to look at it from all these different ways to get any sense of it.
Yes. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Abdul?
Something that the topic of swimming brings forth is the gender dynamics in this story. They're sort of reversed, as you'd see in a typical story. And I think that the fact that, well, firstly, Margarita is the one pursuing Theodora is different from what's standard, and also the fact that she's the one who's wealthier and he's the poor one. Sort of reverses the typical story of where the rich prince marries a poor woman. But also I think the representation of the ocean and the flame of the torch also sort of add to this reversal of gender roles, since fires typically present this masculine energy and the ocean feminine. But here we get sort of the fire or the torch is sedentary, it just waits for the ocean to bring Margarita to Theodora. So, and perhaps this is to highlight the level of chaos that love causes in people's minds, or the social disorder that it leads to.
No, that's a really nice observation. So if we think then about the Bandello story, he gives us a letter that precedes the story. And I think that the gender reversal that Abdul just pointed to, of course, is present in the Bandello story as well. So what are we to learn from the letter that precedes the story, Bandello story? It's interesting that he's either making an allusion to Montaigne on cannibals, or to the to Las Casas and Sepúlveda and the Valladolid hearings of 1550, 1551, in which they debated on the nature of the indigenous peoples, the Amerindians, and criticized deeply the treatment of the Amerindians by the Spaniards. So what are some of the things that come up in this letter frame? Galila?
When I first read the story, that's actually one of the first things that I underlined was the first paragraph. Halfway through it says, there's certainly a great cruelty that we men want to do everything which comes to mind, and yet we do not want poor women to be able to do as they wish, whatever it may be, and if they do anything we don't like, we turn at once to ruses, blades, and poisons. I guess this is the first time that I've ever read anything like it in any of the stories that we've read so far, and it's just kind of like this very honest, like written, this very honest letter from the writer to the reader. Directed to a reader, not to a narrator or anything, but perhaps that may be the purpose of it, just to communicate his ideas and perhaps to give some sort of social commentary on what's going on in society at the time.
Yes, no, I think you're right. But I'll let other people speak, because I think Grace had hand up and Miriam Carta.
Okay. I was very interested in the second paragraph when it says, and in truth, it seems to be a great foolishness on the part of men to base their own honor and that of their entire household on one woman's sexual appetite. If a man makes an error, no matter how enormous, his family does not lose its nobility on this account. So there's kind of this ambiguity that this points out. On one hand, it's saying a woman's not worth, thinking that you're dishonored. She's nothing. It doesn't matter. On the other hand, it's kind of saying that at the same time that the woman does, for some reason, have this profound effect on a family's honor, which a man being unfaithful to his wife, for example, would have. So I didn't really know what to make of that, except that it was ambiguous and kind of maybe purposefully so. I couldn't tell if it was saying let's disregard all women, or they actually have a different superior standing to men in some ways.
I think, well, that's a good observation. I think that it's dealing with property laws, because women are property at this point. And so a line after the one that you read, but we make the laws, we interpret them, we gloss them, and we set them forth as we see fit. So if they changed the law that women were not property, then they would not reflect on the men. One could have that law, but they don't. So I think there probably is more ambiguity than I'm allowing by that interpretation. But I think certainly the property laws issue is there. Carly, you have a hand up.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think definitely on one hand, this is Bandela, right?
Bandela.
I think he's, definitely positing the idea that he thinks that it is a reality that women, could, be equal to men or possess the same, legal. I mean, in terms of the property laws, like that's a distinction of legality, not a distinction of like intrinsic moral worth or capability. And in the very beginning, he's presenting this idea of how did he put it? How good it would be for us if the wheel were to spin and women ruled men. So he's, this seems to be a slightly, comedic proposition. But on the one hand, I think by even saying it, he's presenting the idea that women having the same power as men is a valid potential reality.
Yes, good.
So when we were discussing this story in class, I think we mentioned that in the 16th century there was an increase in there was this like sudden more like a link between women's virginity and family honor, and this idea just like expounded, and it just became it just became central to the honor system, the honor code. In one way, it just shows that Bandela is saying that there are two different ways that the gender should act, and they're clearly outlined by the society. There's a way that men can act, and there's a way that women can act. And men can do almost anything that they want, but women must refrain from being seen publicly. They must be timid, shy, and be obedient to their men. But at the same time, what he's saying is that although this may show that women are essentially governed by men and they're weak, he's also showing that women also have power. And what you're saying that they have the power to influence other people, to show what they do affects the family, and that's something extremely powerful. And so in a way, men's honor is directly tied to women's behaviors. And so men cannot walk freely unless their women behave properly. And so there is this kind of, yes, they're weak, but they also have some kind of power to affect the men.
Okay, good. Lily, yes.
I was gonna say in the introduction, like there's that line where he writes like a man, like for example, marries beneath him, like marries someone, a woman with no money, and like it's fine, he can do whatever he wants. And then right after that says, but a woman who marries beneath her, she's like tormented by society until she is killed. And that just, because I think we're talking about this like right after we're talking about the Margarita story, and it just made me wonder, you know, like if the roles had been reversed, then it was like a man in Margarita's position having fallen in love with like some woman that was not welcome in society, or that was sort of a lower standard. Like clearly the entire story pretty much wouldn't have happened the way that it did, and just really, I mean, just really sort of emphasizes the difference in the way that men and women, like what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. I think the point that Galila brought up about how that is sort of empowering to women in some way is kind of, it's sort of a strange paradoxical thing to think about, because on the one hand, like obviously women are more constrained in this society, but at the same time they are that way because what they do matters a lot more. So it's like this, it's very paradoxical to think about, like are they or are they not sort of powerful if what they do is like simultaneously like very, very important and then also sort of very stifled.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay, good. Mary?
Kind of going back to what Carly said a little while ago, she pointed out this quote about how good it would be for us if the wheel were to spin and women ruled men.
Mm-hmm.
And that reminded me of the very first work that we read, Wickham and the Vampire, when I think they were describing some kind of alternate universe, hell.
Mm-hmm.
And in that universe, they describe women ruling, women are the heads. So it's, I guess, this link that we see from the very beginning, a much earlier story, different culture, to an Italian 16th century novella. This kind of crazy world where women rule is still considered a fantasy.
Yes. Yes, no, that's true, and it's usually referred to as either the world upside down or the topsy-turvy world. And there's a mid-15th century Spanish work precisely in which women become the rulers and men give birth, and it's a horrible, horrible story. It's a very terrible story written by Juan de Flores. So one does see this kind of experimentation, and then the fantasies of the Amazons, and this idea of what would it be like if there were ruling bodies of women or societies only of women. So the story itself, though, and we should only spend a couple of minutes because I want to go to the questions, but the story itself reads very differently from the Margarita story. How so? In terms of, let's say, love, or in terms of power. Yeah.
I mean, in this story, I feel like the Duchess is, endowed with like legitimate power, and her love is legitimate within the context of the story. I mean, not that the Margarita story, that in that story the love was illegitimate, but here it seems to be. I mean, while it's not valued by the people who want to kill her for marrying beneath her, it seems like the story itself legitimizes her love, and she's the powerful figure in the story. She is an agent of her own life. She marries the person that she wants to and keeps it concealed for as long as she can, and has 3 children by him, and does things as she wants to. It's similar in the way that the woman who steps outside the bounds of social propriety is maligned and killed, but I think that in this story it's definitely not, it doesn't have that ridiculous tone to it. It doesn't, she's not falling in love with a hermit. She's falling in love with someone who's, if socially beneath her, still someone who's a part of society, and an appropriate match for her in terms of character.
Yes, good. And she wants to be married too, which is different from the other story. Grace?
Yeah, and love is also something here that doesn't sweep her away entirely, as we see in the other one. I mean, she says, yes, I can take this man as my lover, but no, I don't want to insult God or go against God in that way. So I will do things within the strictures of like social norms and good moral standing. So, yeah.
Yes. Yes, Miriam.
I was just also thinking that she's a very empowered woman who decides to get married because that's what she wants to do, and she thinks it's her right. But the way she reasons it out is very logical. So she's really endowed with this amazing sense of reason, which it comes contrary to a lot of other female characters that we've read in these frame tales, when they kind of go off on a whim and they don't have a strong foundation for why they're pursuing the actions that they do. And here there's almost a page that describes what she's done for the people around her, for her community, and why she is kind of, how that legitimates her to then marry this man.
Yes, I think her spiritual mother is Gismonda in the Decameron, Day 4, Story 1, when she chooses a lover who is, and she's also a young widow, but she chooses the lover who is good and virtuous and thoughtful and not simply, it's not lust driven in the way that Margarita's seems to be. Anything else you want to say about the story? Because I do want to move on to the questions that I sent you. There's much we could say.
I'd like to just say that I find that there's strong dramatic irony. We are told in Bandella's letter their fate, what will happen, so we know the entire time. And so there's this tension throughout, just waiting for the act to happen, and it draws out. Part of that is the Duchess constantly is saying that it's going to go the other way. She is very optimistic. She says that she's not going to be the one that will be killed. So she asks, what's his name, Antonio, to leave.